The desert dusk was heavy with silence, the kind that settles deep into bone. Then it cracked, split open by a scream that clawed at the fading sky. The sound wasn't a cry of surprise but of agony, torn from a throat that already knew despair. Down into a ring of stone the woman fell, bound hands scraping against the jagged walls of a dried-up well. Her body hit hard on rock and dust, breath knocked from her lungs, and for a moment she lay still in the hollow darkness, listening to the echo of her own pain reverberating back at her. Above, the riders laughed, their silhouettes black against the dying light. They spat words in English, a language not her own, and in the clatter of hooves they were gone. Nayeli tried to breathe, tried to sit upright, though her ribs screamed against it. Dust swirled as she pushed herself against the cold stone. She called first in Apache, voice sharp as a hawk's cry. The echo mocked her. Then she forced the broken syllables of English through cracked lips. "Help, someone help." The darkness didn't answer. Only the dry whisper of sand shifting at the well's base. She thought of her sister's face, the last thing she had seen before the chaos came, and anger flooded her veins, hot enough to banish fear for a moment. She would not die voiceless. Her voice rang out again, harsher, ragged, carrying farther than she believed her lungs capable. Miles away, Elias Boone sat his horse by the scrub, chewing a stalk of dry grass like it held the flavor of whiskey. His coat was worn, his beard untrimmed, eyes hidden under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. A drifter's eyes, always searching the horizon, never letting roots sink too deep. He had meant to ride on before nightfall, but the scream stopped him cold. It came again, an echo, faint but sharp, bouncing across the canyon walls. He stiffened in his saddle. He knew the sound of a soul calling for life. He also knew what it cost to answer. He spat the stalk into the dirt and muttered, "Ain't my fight." His horse shifted under him as though it disagreed. Elias turned the reins anyway, pushing toward the trail that would lead him away. But his chest burned, the old wound throbbing, not the bullet scar in his shoulder, but the memory buried deeper. A farmhouse in flames, his wife's face pale against the smoke, her hand slipping from his no matter how tight he clutched. He had run that night too. And the scream that haunted him in sleep wasn't all that different from the one bleeding into the air now. Cursing under his breath, Elias yanked the reins and turned back. The sound drew him like a ghost's hand, pulling him toward the well. He found it just as twilight surrendered to night, the rim of stones casting long shadows. He leaned over and peered into the pit. At first he saw nothing but blackness. Then a pair of eyes glinted upward, fierce despite the grime streaking her face. She shouted up at him, voice raw. "You help, or you leave me die." Elias blinked, caught off guard by the fire in her words. Most half-dead souls pleaded. This one commanded. He cleared his throat. "You got a tongue on you. That's somethin'. But I ain't in the habit of haulin' strangers out o' holes they went fallin' into." Her reply was swift, sharp. "I did not fall. They threw me. Cowards." That word hung in the air, sharper than a blade. Elias felt it cut straight to the marrow. He swore again, softer this time, and pulled the coiled rope from his saddlebag. The horse stamped nervously as he tied the knot, muttering all the while, "Damn fool, Boone. Can't leave nothin' well enough alone." He dropped the rope, its rough fibers slapping against stone. Nayeli grasped it, her fingers raw and blistered but strong. She climbed, slipping once, catching herself with a grunt. Elias braced and hauled, muscles straining, boots grinding into the dirt. Inch by inch, she rose from the pit. When at last she sprawled onto the desert ground, chest heaving, Elias knelt beside her. She looked younger than he'd expected, though her eyes carried storms older than his own. She jerked her wrists, the rope biting into them. Elias cut her bonds with a quick slice of his knife. She rubbed at the angry welts, never taking her gaze off him. Distrust smoldered there, along with something fiercer. "You run now," she asked. "Run." He barked a laugh, low and humorless. "Hell girl, I just dragged you out a hole. Ain't runnin' yet." Her lip curled, not quite a smile. "We see." Elias opened his mouth to answer, but his horse's ears pricked high. He turned, scanning the horizon. A low rumble carried on the wind. Hoofbeats, fast and closing. Dust plumes rose in the distance, silhouetted by the blood-red remains of the sunset. Nayeli followed his gaze, her breath quickening. She knew the sound of those hooves. The men who had left her for dead weren't finished. Elias cursed under his breath, pulling her to her feet. "Looks like your friends are comin' back to check their work," he said, voice low but steady. He checked the load on his revolver, eyes narrowing at the advancing riders. "Hell girl. Looks like we just bought ourselves a war." The riders came fast, a scatter of silhouettes kicking dust into the twilight, the sound of hooves pounding like war drums. Elias grabbed Nayeli by the wrist and hauled her toward his horse. She jerked free, glaring at him with fire in her eyes, but he didn't waste time arguing. He slung the saddlebag over the pommel, swung up, and jerked his head toward her. Now." She hesitated half a breath too long, then vaulted behind him, clutching his coat with boundless strength for someone so battered. The horse bolted at his kick, hooves striking sparks off stone. Bullets cracked through the night. One whined past his ear, another ricocheted off rock. Elias leaned low in the saddle, forcing the animal harder, weaving between scrub and stone. The riders gave chase, voices rising in curses, shouts, and laughter. The desert opened wide ahead, silver under the climbing moon. Wind tore at his hat brim and stung his eyes, but he kept his focus forward, feeling Nayeli's breath hot and ragged against his shoulder. She clung with ferocity, not like a victim, but like someone determined not to fall again. They rode until the shouts dulled behind them. Only when the horse's flanks trembled and foam streaked its neck did Elias pull back on the reins, guiding the animal toward a jagged ravine. They dismounted, slipping into the shelter of rock, hidden from the open plain. Elias crouched, catching his breath, hand on the revolver holstered at his hip. Nayeli stayed on her feet, chest heaving, eyes scanning the shadows. She hadn't collapsed. She hadn't begged. She stood like a soldier stripped of weapons but not of pride. He found himself watching her a moment longer than necessary. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough. She gave a sharp nod. "Not dead." "That's somethin'," he muttered, tearing strips of cloth from his saddlebag. He pressed one into her hand. "Tie it round your wrists. Those ropes left you raw." She studied him a long moment before taking it. Her fingers brushed his brief, wary contact, then she bound her wrists with brisk efficiency. When she finished, she tossed the bloodied rope into the dirt like it had never held her. Silence stretched between them, filled with the whistle of wind and the faint rustle of dry grass. Finally Elias said, "Tomorrow we ride separate ways. They're huntin' you, not me. Better chance we both live that way." Nayeli's head snapped toward him. Her face, already marked with bruises and grit, hardened like stone. "You saved me to leave me." "I saved you 'cause I couldn't do nothin' else," he said, the words dragged up from deep inside. "But I ain't lookin' to bleed for a fight that ain't mine." She stepped closer, her voice cutting like flint. "You think it not yours. But it is. You help or you are coward." The word hit like a bullet. Elias's jaw tightened. "Don't call me that." "Then prove." For a heartbeat, the air between them trembled, filled with challenge. Elias turned away, throwing dry branches into a small pile, striking flint until sparks caught. Flames licked up, casting long shadows on the ravine walls. They ate little, sharing hard bread and jerky from his pack. Nayeli chewed in silence, though her eyes never softened. Elias sat back against stone, pulling the brim of his hat low. "You got kin somewhere?" he asked finally. Her throat worked before she answered. "They come. Kill. My sister," she screamed. "I hear." Her voice cracked once, then hardened. She's still alive. I feel it. Elias stared at the fire, its glow painting memories across his mind. His wife's last cry had never left him. He had failed her. Maybe this woman still had a chance. He didn't say it, but he felt the weight of her words pressing against his chest. The night deepened. Coyotes yipped in the distance. Elias cleaned his revolver by firelight, every movement careful, practiced. Nayeli curled near the flames, not sleeping, only watching the shadows. She seemed carved from stone and flame, fragile and unbreakable at once. When dawn bled across the sky, Elias stamped out the fire and tightened the cinch on his horse. Time to move. They rode through jagged canyons where sunlight barely touched. A rattler coiled near the trail, striking out with lightning speed. Elias's horse shied, nearly unseating him. Nayeli leapt down, grabbed a sharp stone, and crushed the snake's skull in one strike. She lifted it by the tail, tossing it aside. "Breakfast," she said flatly. Elias barked a laugh despite himself. "Girl, you're something else." She almost smiled. Almost. Hours passed. Heat shimmered. They shared sips from his canteen, though it was running low. Every sound behind them made Elias tense. By afternoon, the trail narrowed into a canyon pass. He slowed, senses prickling. "Too quiet," he muttered. The ambush came sudden. 3 men stepping out from the rocks, rifles aimed. Another pair appeared behind, cutting off retreat. Dust rose around them, choking, blinding. Elias drew fast, firing before the nearest man finished his curse. The bullet struck clean, sending the rifle clattering. Shots erupted, echoing like thunder in the stone walls. Nayeli dropped behind a boulder, grabbed Elias's spare revolver from the saddle, and fired wild but fierce. The kickback jolted her, but her second shot clipped a man's shoulder, spinning him down into the dust. Elias took a graze across his arm, blood seeping hot, but he kept firing, moving sharp and low. Nayeli's breath came in sharp bursts, each shot steadier than the last. Together, they forced the remaining attackers to scatter, stumbling into the canyon shadows. The silence afterward was sharp as broken glass. Elias pressed his hand to his bleeding arm. Nayeli's eyes burned with adrenaline, chest rising and falling. She stared at the revolver in her hand like it had changed something inside her. Elias studied her, voice low. "Didn't think you had it in you." She met his gaze, steady as stone. "I fight for her. For my sister. For me." Elias pulled a rag from his pack, pressing it to his wound. Pain throbbed, but beneath it, something else stirred. A flicker of respect, sharp and unexpected. This woman wasn't just a burden. She was steel hidden in dust. They mounted again, riding deeper into the canyon. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long. Behind them, vultures circled, black specks against the reddening sky. Ahead, the path twisted toward unknown ground. And on the cliffs above, a lone figure watched, silent and still. The shape was tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a bow in one hand. Eyes like burning coals followed every move Elias and Nayeli made. The figure turned away without a sound, vanishing into the stone. The canyon walls widened, spilling them into a valley where smoke curled faintly into the evening sky. Elias reined in, hand hovering near his revolver, but Nayeli sat straighter, eyes sharp, voice low. "My people." Relief and tension braided together in those 2 words. Elias studied her, then followed her lead as she guided his horse along the worn path. They entered a camp tucked into the shelter of pines and stone. Apache warriors rose from the shadows, bows drawn, rifles ready. Elias froze, senses prickling, every instinct screaming he was one wrong move from death. Nayeli dismounted, her voice ringing in her own tongue, fierce and fast. Recognition sparked in the warrior's eyes. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Nayeli alive returned from the grave. Then the crowd parted, and he appeared. Chief Taza walked forward with the bearing of a man carved from granite, hair streaked silver, eyes dark and unyielding. He looked at his daughter first, his features softening just a fraction, then shifted to Elias. The warmth vanished. His voice cut through the gathering. "Why is a white man at her side?" Elias remained mounted, his jaw tightening. He tipped his hat with stiff courtesy. "Found her in a bad spot. Hold her out." The chief's eyes narrowed. "And why?" Elias thought of lying, but the weight of Nayeli's stare anchored him. "Because I couldn't walk away." Taza stepped closer, his presence pressing like a storm front. "You are not welcome here. Your kind has taken too much blood from this soil." His hand brushed the haft of his knife. Nayeli moved between them, her voice sharp as a blade. "He saved me. Without him, I am bones at the bottom of a well. You honor me by honoring him." The air bristled. Warriors shifted uneasily, torn between loyalty to their chief and the miracle of seeing Nayeli alive. Finally, Taza raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze lingered on Elias, full of suspicion, but he stepped aside. One night. No more. The camp exhaled, life resuming around them. Fires kindled, pots stirred, voices rising. Children peeked out from behind hides, wide-eyed at the stranger. Elias slid from his horse, his arm stiff with a bandaged wound, his pride bristling at the hostility. But he kept his tongue still. That night, by firelight, he sat apart, back against a log, cleaning his revolver. The Apache ate and laughed around him, the rhythms of their life foreign yet steady. Nayeli sat with her father, her voice low, words flowing in a river he couldn't follow. Every so often she glanced toward Elias. Later, when the fire burned lower, she crossed to him. She crouched by the flames, studying his profile. "You do not like to be still." Elias snorted. "Still means thinkin'. Don't have much stomach for that." She tilted her head. "What you run from?" His jaw tightened. He hadn't meant to speak of it, but her eyes were too direct, too unyielding. He sighed, staring into the fire as if the flames might carry the words for him. "War took plenty from me. But it wasn't war that broke me. Was after. Raiders came. I wasn't there fast enough. My wife, she called for me. I failed her." He rubbed his face, voice dropping. "Been ridin' ever since. Ain't found a place the ghosts won't follow." Silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of fire. Nayeli's expression softened, not with pity but understanding. "You think running makes ghosts tired. It only makes them stronger." He huffed a bitter laugh. "You speak truth like it's easy." "Not easy," she said simply. "But truth." For the first time since he'd known her, she placed a hand lightly on his arm. The touch was brief, but steady, grounding him in a way whiskey and distance never had. The next morning the camp stirred early. Elias watched from the edge as warriors sharpened arrows, checked rifles, prepared as though expecting trouble. He didn't have to wait long for the reason. A scout rode in hard, horse lathered, voice urgent. The words were in Apache, but the tone was universal. Danger. Nayeli translated quickly, her face pale. "Men ride. Many. Ranchers, hunters. They say you," she glanced at Elias, "ride with us. They tell others you betray your own kind." Elias cursed under his breath. He could almost hear the lies spreading like wildfire across the territory, painting him a traitor. He had seen mobs form from less. Chief Taza stood tall, voice commanding. "At dawn they will come. We will fight." He turned his gaze to Elias, cold and sharp. "You have no place here. Ride now, and you may yet live." The words landed heavy, offering him the freedom he had always taken. He could mount up, vanish into the horizon, let the storm swallow these people who already doubted him. His hand itched toward the reins. Then Nayeli stepped forward, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "If you leave, you prove them right. That you are coward. That you cannot stand for anyone but yourself." Her words cut deeper than bullets, stirring the wound he had carried for years. He looked at her. This woman who had risen from darkness, who had fought by his side, who still searched for her stolen sister. Her eyes were fierce, but behind them he saw fear and hope. The camp waited, breath held. Elias felt the desert pressing in, the old ghosts clawing at his back. He swallowed hard, his voice low but resolute. "I done run enough." The fire cracked. The warriors' eyes flicked between him and their chief, measuring his worth. Chief Taza said nothing, but his silence carried weight, as though granting Elias the chance to prove his words in action. The night stretched long, every star above sharp as a blade. Elias sat by the fire, revolver in his lap, the heat of decision burning in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt stillness without the ache of running. When dawn's first light brushed the horizon, the camp stood ready. The dust cloud of riders approached, the earth trembling with the weight of their charge. Elias tightened his grip on the revolver. His jaw set. This time he would not turn away. The ground trembled with the weight of hooves, a dull roar rising with the dawn. Dust churned on the horizon, blotting out the pale light, and the valley braced for fire and steel. Elias stood with his revolver heavy at his side, the leather of his holster worn smooth by years of hesitation. Not this time. Around him, the Apache moved with silent precision, bows strung, rifles loaded, their faces painted with resolve. Nayeli stood tall beside her father, a rifle gripped in her hands, her eyes sharp as flint. She had been a prisoner in darkness, but there was no fear in her stance now. The riders burst into view, a mob of ranchers and hired guns, shouting curses that echoed against the cliffs. Gun barrels glinted in the morning light. Their leader raised a hand, and the line surged forward, a tide of violence crashing down the valley. The first shot cracked, splitting the air. Then the world erupted. Smoke and dust rolled thick as the clash began, bullets whining past like hornets. Elias dropped behind a boulder, returning fire with sharp, measured aim. Each pull of the trigger was steady, a rhythm beaten into him by war, but this time it carried something heavier. Each shot was a promise, to himself, to the ghosts, to the woman who had called him from the edge of his old life. Arrows hissed overhead, striking men from their saddles. The Apache fought like shadows, appearing and vanishing through the smoke. Nayeli fired beside Elias, her shots clumsy at first, then surer, steadier. She stood her ground when the line pressed closer, her face set in iron. Elias watched her once between volleys and saw not the woman he had pulled from the well but someone rising taller than her own pain. A rider broke through the defense, charging straight for her. Elias's revolver barked once, the man toppling, horse veering away. Blood streaked across Elias's arm where a bullet grazed, hot and sharp, but he barely flinched. He reloaded, hands moving with a speed born of necessity. Smoke stung his eyes and still he fought, every muscle taut with the need to stand, not run. The mob pressed harder, their numbers fierce, their shouts blending into a single roar. Chief Taza took a bullet to the shoulder, staggering but refusing to fall. He barked orders even as blood seeped down his arm, rallying his warriors to hold the line. Nayeli darted to his side, catching him before he slipped, her face pale but unyielding. When he passed her his rifle, she did not hesitate. She lifted it, braced it against her shoulder, and fired with a cry that echoed like thunder. The bullet struck true. Elias felt pride stir hot in his chest, a pride he had not felt in years, not for himself but for her. He rose from cover, reckless but resolute, and advanced through the haze. Bullets tore the air around him. He fired, ducked, moved again, a relentless shadow pushing forward. A child's cry pierced the chaos, one of the younger ones trapped behind the line, frozen in terror as a rider bore down. Elias lunged, throwing himself between horse and child, dragging the boy aside as his revolver thundered. The rider toppled, horse screaming as it crashed into the dirt. The boy clung to him, trembling. Elias shoved him toward safety, breath ragged, vision swimming. Go. Run. The clash seemed endless. Smoke, screams, thunder of hooves, the crack of rifles. Elias's arm burned, his chest heaved, but still he fought. Still he stood. Nayeli's voice rose above the din, shouting words he couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear. Defiance, unbroken spirit. She fired until her rifle clicked empty, then snatched arrows from the ground and shot with deadly aim. Gradually the tide began to turn. The attackers faltered, their fallen littering the valley floor. Some turned their horses, retreat already on their faces. Others pressed on with blind rage, but they were fewer now, weaker. Elias fired his last round, dropped the revolver, and seized a fallen rifle, pressing forward alongside warriors who no longer looked at him with suspicion but with fire to match his own. At last, the leader of the ranchers, a broad man with a scarred cheek, raised his hand and wheeled his horse back, barking orders. The remnants of his force broke, scattering across the open plain, leaving only smoke and silence in their wake. The valley held its breath. Then the silence broke with the ragged sound of survivors breathing, coughing, murmuring names. The ground was littered with the wreckage of violence. Fallen men, broken weapons, churned earth stained dark. Elias sank to his knees, the borrowed rifle slipping from his grasp. His body trembled with exhaustion, blood streaking down his sleeve. For the first time in years, his breath came not with the weight of regret but with something close to release. He had not run. He had stood, and the ghosts were quieter for it. Nayeli approached, her face streaked with soot and sweat, her hands shaking though she tried to hide it. She lowered the rifle and knelt beside him, her voice softer than the battlefield should allow. "You fight like man who has nothing left to lose. But you have something now." He looked at her, and the truth in her eyes left him raw. "Maybe I do." Chief Taza was carried forward, wounded but alive. His gaze met Elias's, still hard but no longer hostile. With the smallest nod, he acknowledged what words could not, respect hard-earned. The fires were tended, the fallen mourned, the camp alive though scarred. Elias stood among them, no longer just a drifter on the edge of another man's war. Nayeli, once thrown into darkness to be forgotten, stood tall, her voice steady as she gave orders, tended wounds, kept her people upright. Together they had endured. When night fell again, quiet returned to the valley. Elias sat by the fire, hat in his hands, staring into the flames. The ghosts still lingered, but their voices were distant now, dulled by the roar of the living. Nayeli sat across from him, eyes reflecting the glow, strength carved deep into her face. A narrator's voice seemed to settle in the silence, as though the land itself spoke. They threw her into the well to be silenced, but her voice rose louder than the dust. One man answered, and in answering, found himself reborn. Elias lifted his gaze to the stars, and for the first time in years, he did not feel the urge to flee. He had chosen to stay, to fight, to belong. And for those who listened, the story left a reminder. If this tale moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice, like hers, deserves to be heard.